Chapter 7 is all about percents, and so we're going to start off just by writing percents different ways based on the information that we're given. So you're going to start seeing a relationship between ratios or fractions and decimals and percents. They all are related to one another. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what is a percent. If you look at the word percent, you see CENT, which means 100. Think of a century as 100 years, a centipede has 100 legs, and so on. There's 100 cents in a dollar, and then the prefix PER, per, for every 100. So, what is a percent? A percent means per 100. And N percent can be expressed as the ratio of N to 100. So they wrote it out with the word to, but remember we could also write the ratio as N to 100. So we're going to start looking at the relationship between all of these. So there's several different types of problems that we can look at. We're going to start off by looking at percents and rewriting it in another form. So the directions do say write 3 kinds of notation for the given percent. They want us to write the ratio, and then they want us to write it as a whole number times a ratio, and then finally a whole number times a decimal. So if we just focus on this first one, 45%. 45% written as a fraction would simply be 45 over 100. If we want to write it as a whole number times the 1 over 100, then we would say 45 times 1 over 100. Or we could finally write it as a whole number times the decimal equivalent of 100th would be times 0.01. These are 3 different ways that you can write a percent. Now, normally our focus is going to be on the ratio, 45 over 100, and then we could simplify that if the directions told us to simplify. But sometimes we can't get directly there, and sometimes we have to write it as a multiplication problem to find what we're looking for. So if we look at 11.1%, what would that look like in all 3 parts? Well, you take your percent, which is 11.1, and put it over 100. Okay, that's the first part. And then the second part would be to take that 11.1 and multiply that by 1 over 100, because that also means percent. And then we could take 11.1 times 0.01. So you can see, if you start off, if your percent is a decimal, if we needed to use that, we would probably use the decimal form, 11.1 times 0.01. And if you do that mathematically, then you would arrive at the decimal equivalent of 11.1%. So moving down here to objective B, convert between percent notation and decimal notation. What you can do is, since they want decimal notation, then if we see 23%, that means 23 times 0.01. And if you do that in your calculator, you're going to get decimal point 23 or 0.23. And you'll see a pattern emerge here in a few minutes, and you probably might already know about the pattern. If we look at number 9, 31.76%, if we want the decimal, 31.76 times 0.01. Again, if you put that in your calculator, you're going to get decimal point 3176. Let's look at that 6%. If we again want the decimal, we would say 6 times 0.01. and we would get in our calculator decimal point 0.06. So I guess my question to you would be, what pattern do you notice? Hopefully you recognize that if you start off with 23, all you have to do to arrive at the decimal is move your decimal point 2 places. I had to move it 2 places in the 31.76, and I had to move it 2 places on the 6 as well. So that's your pattern. So from now on, do you necessarily need to write the number times 0.01? Probably not. You could go straight to your answer. Like now I see 46.2. Well, 46.2, I don't have to write a multiplication problem. I just have to move my decimal point 2 places to the left, which is going to give me 0.462. And what about 20%? Well, if you move your decimal point 2 places, you get 0.20. So converting from a percent to a decimal is as simple as moving your decimal point 2 places. Now let's take that idea of moving the decimal point, and what if we started with the decimal and we wanted to go to the percent? Well, if I had the percent and I went to the decimal, the pattern was to move your decimal point 2 places to the left. If you're starting with the decimal and you want the percent, then you're going to move your decimal point 2 places to the right. So for our problems here, if I have 0.93 to find the percent, I'm going to move my decimal point 2 places, which is going to give me 93%. If I move my decimal point 2 places here, I'm going to get 4%. What about 2.5? Well, if I move it 2 places, I'm actually going to get 250%. You might be asking, where did that 0 come from? Well, when I move it once, that gets it behind the 5. I got to move it one more time, so I fill in with a placeholder of a 0. Let's scoot down here to the bottom. 0.025. Well, move it 2 places. That's going to be 2.5%.